Hello and welcome to episode 7 of this tutorial. In this episode, I am going to talk about lifecycle methods and performance optimizations. So if you're, familiar with this concept of lifecycle hooks or lifecycle methods in Angular or React, for example, in Lit, we have the same idea. So let's get started with this topic. The goals of this episode, we want to understand the lifecycle callbacks for components that we developed using Lit. We want to see how we can use these lifecycle callbacks or lifecycle hooks, and we want to explore ways to optimize the rendering of our components while avoiding unnecessary updates. But before we do that, let's talk about the lifecycle methods. So Lit, like other tools like React or Angular, extends, or the components in Lit extend the web components. So using Lit, we now know that we can create web components, and these components can benefit from lifecycle methods or lifecycle callbacks, similar to other front-end technologies. So we've got a handful of lifecycle methods. We've got constructor, we've got connected callback, we've got disconnected callback, first updated, and updated. And we saw some of these in previous episodes as well, but we want to dedicate this episode to these lifecycle methods and to, enhance the bookcard component using these lifecycle methods. So, lifecycle methods allow you to write code which will be executed during the lifecycle of a component. For example, the constructor method allows you to write some code, and that piece of code that you write for the constructor of your component is going to execute when the component instance is first created. So what you can do, for example, in the constructor is to set up some initial state or variables. Connected callback is another lifecycle method that you can use when the component is added to the document object model or to the DOM. So in the connected callback, one of the things that you can do is to, for example, fetch some data from your API or add some event listeners if you want. Disconnected callback is another lifecycle method that is called when the component is removed from DOM. So connected callback, disconnected callback. In this callback, you can, do some cleanup, remove like event listeners and so on. First updated, as the name suggests, is executed when the component first renders. So after the first render of the component, first updated is going to execute. And you can do, for example, one-time setup configuration in this lifecycle method. And then you've got updated change props. Change props as the input parameter. After any reactive update that your component goes through, this lifecycle method is going to execute. And one of the things that you can do in this method is to react to some changes that happen to your properties or your states. And if you want to know more about properties or states, you know that in previous episodes we talked about them. So right now we want to add some lifecycle methods or lifecycle hooks to the bookcard component and see how we can optimize the rendering of this component. So the first thing we want to do is to do some simple logging in each one of these lifecycle events to do some debugging using the console window of our browser. Then we want to use should update to prevent unnecessary renders for the bookcard component. And finally, we will see how we can use updated to react to specific prop changes. So you remember the bookcard component, right? The bookcard component is a component that we use in the book list component. So this is the bookcard component, and you know that this component has some styles, and then we've got some properties that the parent component can set, and then we've got like an event handler, and then we've got the render method. I am going to open the console window as well, so that we can see the messages that we are going to kind of print to the console. So again, we are creating some lifecycle methods, as you can see: constructed, connected callback, disconnected callback, first updated, and should update. As you can see here, we're going to talk about this, by the way, and then update it. So we're writing these different lifecycle methods to optimize the performance of this component. Before we go to the explanations I have provided for each one of these, lifecycle methods, I want to take you to VS Code and add these lifecycle methods to our, component. So I am going to, create the constructor, the connected callback, disconnected callback, first updated, should update, and updated. And I am going to explore these one by one in full detail. So let's talk about these. The constructor, as you remember, I talked about the constructor. So the constructor lifecycle, or should I say, the code that you put inside of the constructor runs once when the component is first created. So as you saw, we are calling the super function to make sure the parent class, the lit element, is set up properly, because you know that the web components you create in lit inherit from lit element. So by calling super inside of the constructor, as you can see here, we make sure that the base class, which is lit element, is set up properly. And then we do a simple logging to the console when the book card component, the instance, is first constructed. So think of this as the building the box, if you will, building the component. But of course the component is not added to the DOM yet. We're just creating this. So if you take a look at the console, you can see the constructor of the 3 book card instances that we have on the page. So we've got 3 instances of the book card component, and as you can see, the constructor has been called 3 times. And then we've got the connected callback. The connected callback is called when the component is actually added to the DOM, to the document object model, and we do some logging because the component is now present in the document object model. So the code inside of this component, inside of this lifecycle method, is executed after the code inside of the constructor method. So the code inside of the constructor is executed when the component is created, but when the component is added to the page, the connected callback is executed. So think of this as plugging in your component so it can do things like, for example, fetching some data or start some timers. Then we've got disconnected callback. So in disconnected callback, the component has been removed from the page. So it runs when the component is removed from the page. You can do some cleanup if you want. For example, removing event listeners or timers, like unplugging the component when it is no longer needed. And if you take a look here, inside of the disconnected callback, we are again calling the super, the disconnected callback. In the connected callback, we're also calling the connected callback of our super class. And then we're doing, some relevant logging. Then we've got first updated. I talked about first updated. The code inside of the first updated lifecycle method runs after the component renders for the first time. So this is a perfect place to run some code that needs the DOM to exist. For example, if you want to access some elements from your components and you want to make sure that the document object model is present, then execute that, access element code. The first updated, lifecycle method is the perfect place to do that. Again, the first updated is executed when the component renders for the first time. So think of it as the book card has been drawn. Now do something. So take a look here. We've got the, constructor. We've got the connected to DOM. This is the connected callback, right? And this is the first updated for the, book card component. And then we've got the title change, which we will, explore in a second. Then we've got the first updated lifecycle method for the second component. then again the title changed, and so on. Now let's continue and talk about should update and updated. These two are very important. So should update is called before an update happens. So you can return true if the component should re-render, or false if you do not want the component to re-render. In this case, it only updates if certain properties change, like title, author, and so on. So saves time by avoiding unnecessary work. So inside of the should update, let's take a look at the code here, should update. So basically what we are saying is that if these properties, if these props, so we've got different props, right? If you remember, these are the props that the component receives from outside, from the parent component, for example. So I'm saying if these props are changed, then I want to return true, meaning that the component needs to re-render. Otherwise, I want to return false, meaning that the component doesn't need to re-render. So using should update, you can control, when the component needs to re-render to kind of avoid unnecessary re-renders of the component and kind of boost the performance of your application. So as the comment says, only update if relevant props changed. And we've got 4 different props: title, author, year, and bestseller. So that was should update. And the next one, the last one, is the updated lifecycle method. So this is called after an update happens. You can run code based on which property changed. We have 4 properties right now. Here, if the title changes, it logs the new title. Useful for reacting to changes like updating related data or triggering animations. Let's take a look at this code. So updated. Again, remember, should update controls if the component needs to re-render or not, and updated is executed after the component re-renders. So here again, I'm controlling a piece of logic. What I'm trying to do here, what I'm doing is that I'm checking the let's say the prop that changed. If the prop that changed was the title prop, I am going to log to the console this piece of text. Or if the other props, for example, author, year, bestseller, are changed, I'm not going to do anything. Again, remember, using should update, you control whether the component needs to re-render or not, and updated is executed when the component is re-rendered. So using the updated, you can do something based on the prop that was changed. In this case, I'm checking whether it was the title prop that made the component re-render, and if that was the case, I'm doing this console log thing to the console. So test the changes, run the app, and then open the developer console to see the logs for each lifecycle method. In this episode, we kind of explored the various and the most important lifecycle hooks or lifecycle methods in components. We now know the different places or the different hooks that components provide us in order to perform some setup or cleanup. We now know how to optimize the rendering of our components using the should update to control whether the component needs to be re-rendered or not. And we're using the updated lifecycle method to kind of react to the property that was changed. So for example, as I told you, if the title property was the reason why the component got updated, we are going to console log that. And again, should update, as I told you, allows us to control whether the component actually needs to re-render or not. Right now, using this condition, I'm only allowing the component to re-render if one of these properties are changed. So if one property, title, author, year, bestseller, is changed, we are going to return true, meaning that the component needs to re-render. And that was it for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed watching it. See you in the next one.